90% of men over 50 are doing this wrong every day. It's hurting their prostate. I want you to think about your last 24 hours, not the dramatic moments, the boring ones, the parts of your day so ordinary you would never describe them to anyone because they feel like nothing. How long you sat in your car commuting, how many hours you spent at your desk, what you drank, and when you stopped drinking it. Whether you cut back on water this afternoon because you did not want to be searching for a bathroom during a meeting. None of that feels like a health decision. It feels like just living your life. But here is what almost nobody over 50 has been told clearly. The vast majority of men in this age group are making the exact same handful of daily mistakes, repeated automatically, without any awareness that they are happening. And those mistakes are actively accelerating the very prostate problems they are trying to avoid. I am Dr. John. I am a urologist. And today, I am going to walk you through the specific daily habit that close to 90% of men over 50 get wrong, why it is so damaging, and exactly how to fix it starting today, along with the related mistakes that almost always travel alongside it. The habit: restricting fluids because of urinary symptoms. If you are over 50 and you have started cutting back on how much you drink, especially in the afternoon and evening, because you are tired of running to the bathroom, you are not alone. This is, by a wide margin, the single most common self-management strategy men adopt once early prostate symptoms appear. And it is also one of the most counterproductive things you can do. Here is the logic that leads men there, and why that logic, while understandable, works against you. The reasoning goes like this. If urinating frequently is the problem, then drinking less should reduce how often I need to go. It sounds airtight. It is also incomplete in a way that actually makes your underlying prostate symptoms worse over time, not better. Let me explain the actual physiology. When you reduce your fluid intake, your urine becomes more concentrated. Concentrated urine carries a higher density of waste products, mineral salts, and metabolic byproducts. That concentrated urine is directly irritating to the lining of your bladder and the urethral tissue running through your prostate. Chronic exposure to that more concentrated, more irritating urine perpetuates an inflammatory state in exactly the tissue that is already under stress from prostate enlargement. In other words, by drinking less to reduce urinary frequency, you are concentrating your urine, which irritates your bladder and prostatic urethra more intensely, which can actually worsen the urgency and irritation driving the frequency you were trying to escape in the first place. You have created a cycle that quietly works against you while feeling, in the moment, like a perfectly reasonable response. There is a second consequence that compounds this. Mild chronic dehydration thickens the consistency of blood and other bodily fluids, including the fluid moving through your pelvic circulation. Thicker fluid moves less efficiently through the small vessels supplying the prostate, modestly reducing the oxygen delivery to that tissue. Prostate tissue that is chronically under-oxygenated activates growth-promoting cellular pathways as a compensatory response, the same mechanism that drives much of the slow progression of benign prostatic hyperplasia over years. There is also a third, more immediate consequence. Chronic dehydration thickens stool consistency and increases straining during bowel movements. A chronically distended colon, dealing with harder stool and requiring more frequent straining, sits in direct physical proximity to the bladder and prostate within the pelvis. That straining and the increased pelvic pressure it generates places additional mechanical stress on the exact structures already struggling with an enlarging prostate. The doctors who specialize in this condition are remarkably consistent about this point precisely because it runs so counter to instinct. Cutting back on fluids in response to urinary symptoms does not solve the underlying problem. It treats a symptom by creating conditions that make the underlying condition progress less favorably, what you should actually do instead. The fix here is not simply drink more water in a generic sense. It is about timing your hydration deliberately rather than restricting it indiscriminately throughout the day. Drink the majority of your daily fluid intake earlier in the day through the morning and into the early afternoon. This allows your kidneys to process that volume during your most active hours, when getting up to use the bathroom is a minor interruption rather than a sleep-disrupting event. Begin tapering your fluid intake in the late afternoon and reduce it significantly in the few hours before bed specifically, rather than restricting it across the entire day indiscriminately. This addresses the nighttime urination concern directly without forcing you into a chronically dehydrated state during your waking hours, when adequate hydration is actually protective for your bladder and prostate tissue. Continue eating water-rich foods throughout the day, regardless of your beverage timing. Fruits, vegetables, and soups contribute meaningfully to your total daily fluid intake without producing the same bladder-filling effect as a large glass of water consumed all at once. If nighttime urination remains disruptive, even with this front-loaded approach, that is a symptom worth discussing directly with your physician rather than a reason to return to restricting fluids during the day. There are specific targeted interventions for nighttime urinary frequency that do not require accepting daytime dehydration as the trade-off. The second daily mistake that almost always travels alongside the first: prolonged unbroken sitting. If you have a job that involves sitting for extended stretches, or if your evenings consist largely of sitting on a couch, you are part of an overwhelming majority of men over 50 who spend the bulk of their waking hours seated, often for 2, 3, or 4 consecutive hours at a time, without any meaningful interruption. This matters for your prostate for a specific and well-documented reason. The prostate gland depends on adequate blood flow through the pelvic region for its oxygen supply and for the clearance of inflammatory waste products from its tissue. When you sit for extended, unbroken periods, the muscles of the thighs and buttocks compress the blood vessels running through them, increasing resistance to blood flow in the pelvic region. At the same time, the muscular pumping action of the legs, which under active conditions continuously helps return venous blood toward the heart, becomes essentially inactive. The combined effect is a measurable reduction in pelvic blood flow and a degree of venous pooling in the pelvic region during prolonged sitting. Prostate tissue receiving less oxygen as a result responds by activating cellular pathways associated with tissue growth, the same general mechanism implicated in the slow progression of BPH over years. This is precisely why research has found that men who report sitting for more than 4 hours daily have meaningfully higher urinary symptom scores than men who sit for less than 2 hours, independent of how much exercise they get during the rest of the day. Sitting itself, separate from overall activity level, appears to be its own contributing factor. The fix here does not require a gym membership or a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. It requires breaking up sitting time at regular intervals. Standing and moving for even 3 to 5 minutes every 60 to 90 minutes restores pelvic blood flow meaningfully and prevents the prolonged accumulation of that low-flow, low-oxygen state in prostatic tissue. Set a recurring reminder on your phone if you need the structure to make this automatic rather than something you have to remember to do. The third daily mistake: treating evening alcohol and caffeine as harmless habits rather than active contributors to symptoms. Most men over 50 who enjoy a drink in the evening or who drink coffee or tea throughout the afternoon without much thought have never connected those specific habits to their urinary symptoms. But both substances directly irritate the bladder and worsen the frequency and urgency that men are often trying to manage through other means. Caffeine functions as a mild diuretic, increasing the rate at which your kidneys produce urine independent of how much fluid you have actually consumed. Beyond that diuretic effect, caffeine also has a direct irritant effect on bladder tissue, which can lower the volume threshold at which your bladder signals urgency. Alcohol produces a similar but distinct combination of effects, increasing urine output while simultaneously relaxing bladder muscle function in ways that can worsen both urgency and incomplete emptying. The practical guidance here is straightforward. Limiting caffeine and alcohol, particularly in the hours before situations where bathroom access will be limited or in the evening before bed, reduces bladder irritation in a way that is independent of and additive to the hydration timing changes already discussed. The fourth mistake, and the one most directly connected to diet: The processed, high-sodium, high-sugar pattern that has become the default evening meal for a large share of men in this age group. This one deserves particular attention because of how invisible it is. Processed meats, commercial sauces and condiments, canned goods, and high-sugar refined carbohydrates have become the dominant components of a typical evening meal for a substantial share of men over 50, not through any deliberate decision, but simply through convenience and habit accumulated over years. The research on diet and prostate health is genuinely consistent on this point. Diets heavy in red meat, processed foods, and excess sugar tend to actively fuel the kind of chronic, low-grade inflammation that is now understood to be a significant driver of BPH progression, not merely a downstream consequence of it. The shift toward a diet built more around vegetables, fruit, fatty fish, and fiber, the general Mediterranean-style pattern that comes up repeatedly in this research, offers meaningfully better and more sustainable protection over time. Specific foods worth incorporating deliberately include tomatoes and watermelon, both rich in lycopene, an antioxidant compound shown to specifically protect prostate cells. Cruciferous vegetables, including broccoli, kale, and Brussels sprouts, which contain sulforaphane, a compound supporting detoxification and hormonal balance. Fatty fish like salmon, providing omega-3 fatty acids that lower the systemic inflammation directly connected to BPH progression. And pumpkin seeds and nuts, which supply zinc, a mineral essential for healthy testosterone production and prostate function. The fifth mistake: treating prostate symptoms as something to manage privately rather than something to bring to a doctor early. This final mistake is behavioral rather than physiological, but it may be the most consequential of all five because it determines whether any of the other four ever get addressed properly. The earliest signs of prostate trouble are frequently subtle. Difficulty initiating urination, a stream that has lost some of its force. A sense that the bladder never quite empties completely. Waking once or twice at night to urinate when that never used to happen. These symptoms do not always indicate something serious, and in the substantial majority of cases, they reflect benign prostatic hyperplasia rather than anything more concerning. But many men quietly conclude that these changes are simply part of getting older, file them away as something to live with rather than something to evaluate, and continue for years without ever raising the topic with a physician. The guidance from the people who study this consistently is the same. These symptoms deserve to be checked rather than simply assumed to be a normal and unavoidable feature of aging. Early evaluation matters specifically because it expands the range of options available to you. The behavioral interventions, the dietary changes, the simple daily adjustments discussed throughout this conversation are most effective when implemented early, before symptoms have progressed to the point where more aggressive intervention becomes necessary. There are specific signs that should never simply be monitored privately, and instead warrant prompt evaluation, regardless of how mild everything else feels. Blood in the urine or semen at any point. Persistent pelvic pain. Any sudden dramatic change in your ability to urinate. These deserve immediate attention rather than being folded into a general wait-and-see approach. Bringing everything together. If you recognized yourself in more than one of these 5 patterns today, you are, statistically, in the clear majority of men over 50, not some unusual outlier. That is precisely the point of this conversation. These are not rare mistakes made by a careless few. They are the quiet, automatic default behaviors of the overwhelming majority, repeated daily without anyone ever explaining why they matter or what to do differently. The fix for each one is genuinely simple, and none of it requires a prescription or a dramatic life overhaul. Stop restricting fluids across the entire day. Front-load your hydration earlier in the day instead, and taper specifically in the evening. Break up prolonged sitting with brief movement every 60 to 90 minutes, regardless of how active you are at other points in the day. Limit caffeine and alcohol, particularly in the hours before bed or before situations requiring extended time away from a bathroom. Shift your evening meals away from processed, high-sodium, high-sugar defaults and toward the vegetables, fish, and fiber pattern the research consistently supports. And stop privately managing symptoms that deserve a real conversation with your physician. Annual PSA testing and prostate evaluation after 50 remain essential regardless of how well you address everything else on this list, because they catch what daily habits alone cannot. None of these 5 changes asks you to overhaul your entire life overnight. Each one simply asks you to notice an automatic daily pattern you have likely never questioned and to adjust it deliberately rather than continuing it by default. This is Dr. John. Pay attention to the ordinary parts of your day. That is usually where the real difference gets made. I will see you in the next one.